If Rachel's card declines tonight, do not blame us this time, my father said into the microphone, and 36 people in the private room at Carrabba's on West End Avenue went quiet. By 6:14 that evening, both my bank accounts were frozen under false fraud claims my parents made in my name, and $18,460.22 stopped being mine in any usable way. It locked my rent money, my apartment deposit, my scrubs order, and the payroll account my new job needed by Monday morning. 3 weeks later, a woman I had never met walked into another family dinner with printed call logs, played a recorded phone call, and my mother stopped halfway through the word misunderstanding. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. My name is Rachel Ann Mercer. I'm 24 years old. Now let me take you back to Nashville, Tennessee on Friday, May 17th, 2024. I had graduated from dental hygiene school that morning at 10 o'clock at Belmont. White uniform, pinned cap, the whole thing. The campus flowers smelled like hot dirt and mulch because it had rained before sunrise and then turned into one of those sticky Tennessee afternoons where your hair starts giving up by 11. I had spent 3 years working two jobs, one at a pediatric front desk in Green Hills and one doing Saturday reception at a salon on Charlotte Avenue, and I had exactly one clean plan for the next 6 weeks. Start my new hygienist position at Riverstone Pediatric Dental on Monday, move into my apartment in Donelson on June 1st, and stop needing anything from my parents except occasional politeness. That was the dream anyway. My parents, Daniel and Marcia Mercer, liked events where other people had to watch them behave like generous people. They paid for the dinner at Carrabba's. They invited cousins I had not seen since Christmas of 2022, my old youth pastor's wife, two of my instructors, and my mother's friend Cheryl, who never came to anything unless she wanted a story to repeat later. My younger brother Evan was there too, home from MTSU in a navy polo looking like he had not slept enough and regretted coming. My Aunt Linda sat across from me with the kind of smile women wear when they are trying to hold a room together with eye contact alone. Dinner smelled like garlic butter and grilled chicken and those warm loaves they keep bringing without asking. There were two long tables pushed into a square. The private room had beige walls and one fake olive tree with dust on the leaves. I remember these details because memory gets petty when it is protecting you. I had not spoken to my parents about money in months. That matters. In February, I moved my savings out of the joint student account my mother had opened for me at 19 and into a new checking and savings pair at Cumberland Federal Bank. Different branch, different login, different debit card. I changed every security question to answers that did not correspond to reality, which is something a banker named Talia Green had told me to do after I mentioned, casually, that my mother still sometimes said things like, "I know your social security number, Rachel. Let us not play games." I did not make a scene about any of that. I did not accuse them. I did not announce boundaries over brunch like a podcast guest. I just moved quietly. At 7:21, after the plates had been cleared and the tiramisu came out in little square dishes with too much cocoa powder, my father stood up with the microphone from the event speaker. He did that smile he uses in church photos, mouth first, eyes later. He tapped the side of the microphone and said, "I would like to thank everyone for supporting Rachel through a difficult few years. She has finally finished something." A few people laughed politely because sometimes rooms do not know they are in danger yet. Then he looked directly at me and said, "If Rachel's card declines tonight, do not blame us this time." There is a very specific sound a room makes when 36 adults all realize they have just witnessed something cruel on purpose. It is not a gasp, it is chairs stopping, forks touching plates, someone clearing their throat and then deciding against speaking. I felt my face go hot, not embarrassed hot, alarmed hot. I took my wallet out, because instinct is humiliating. I opened it under the table. My debit card was there, navy blue Cumberland Federal, new enough that the edges still felt sharp. I opened my app, red banner across the top, accounts restricted. Please contact fraud services. I checked the checking, restricted the savings, restricted, the balance was visible but gray. $18,460.22 across both accounts. Untouchable. That is how fast a person can lose a month of her life. I stood up and walked out into the hallway with my phone. The carpet outside the room smelled like industrial cleaner and tomato sauce. I called the number on the app. Fraud services after hours. A woman named Patrice answered on the second transfer and asked me to verify my identity. I did. Then she said, "Ms. Mercer, your accounts were restricted at 3:47 p.m. due to high-risk concerns and a verbal fraud alert stating you were being financially exploited and were attempting unauthorized withdrawals while under impairment." I said, "What does that even mean?" She lowered her voice. "I can only tell you the alert came from a caller who passed enough security to trigger a review." There were also follow-up notes from another caller claiming to be immediate family. I looked through the little glass pane in the private room door. My father was cutting his tiramisu like nothing had happened. My mother was leaning toward Cheryl, speaking calmly, one hand folded over the other. I asked Patrice, "Was this my mother?" Patrice said, "I cannot tell you that on this call. I can tell you that you need to come to a branch in person tomorrow with identification and ask for a fraud supervisor. Do not discuss account details with anyone else tonight." I thanked her. I went back inside. My father raised his eyebrows at me as if he were waiting for me to perform. I sat down. My Aunt Linda leaned over and whispered, "Rachel, what happened?" I said, "My accounts are frozen." She stared at me for 1 second too long and then looked at my mother. My mother dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin and said, very evenly, "You need to understand that banks take unusual behavior seriously." I said, "What did you do?" She did not look at me. She looked at the center of the table and said, "I made a call any responsible parent would make. I am 24. You are impulsive." There was a silence then that lasted maybe 4 seconds. Long enough for every person at the table to decide whether they were going to become useful or ornamental. My brother looked down at his water glass. That is a kind of betrayal, too. Not the loud kind, the seated kind. My instructor, Professor Helena Ruiz, set down her spoon and said, "Marcia, did you interfere with Rachel's bank account?" My mother smiled at her like she was explaining weather to a child. "Helena, with respect, families handle private matters privately." I put my napkin on the table. I did not argue. I did not cry. Instead, I opened my phone notes app and typed the time, 7:32 p.m., and a list of exact words while they were still fresh. Then I asked the server for a printed receipt showing I had not paid. I folded it into my purse. If you have ever had that moment where you know everything is about to change and somehow the room still expects you to finish dessert, you know exactly how strange those next 10 minutes were. I want you to stay with me because what mattered most was not the toast. It was the paper trail they thought I would be too shocked to build. I left at 7:41. My Aunt Linda followed me into the parking lot beside the row of crepe myrtles and said, "Do you need to come home with me?" It smelled like wet pavement and cigarette smoke from the cook's break area. I told her no. She squeezed my forearm once, hard, like she was trying to say something she did not trust herself to say out loud. I drove my 2013 Honda Civic to the extended stay on Charlotte Pike, where I was living for 11 days between finishing my lease and getting into the new apartment. The air conditioner rattled. The room smelled faintly like bleach and old coffee. I sat at the little laminate table and wrote everything down on paper because phones die and memory gets bullied. Time of my father's quote, the fraud line call, my mother's exact sentence, who was in the room, which side of the table Cheryl had been sitting on, the kind of microphone, even the fake olive tree. At 8:12, my new employer, Dr. Meredith Sloan at Riverstone Pediatric Dental, emailed me the payroll packet again because I had missed one signature line. I stared at the direct deposit form and nearly laughed. It felt obscene. I emailed back, "Thank you, minor bank issue tonight. I will bring updated paperwork in person Monday morning. Minor women are taught to make disasters sound administrative." At 8:23, my mother texted me, "You are welcome to calm down and discuss this tomorrow." The bank flagged behavior that looked unstable. "Your father and I are trying to protect what little you have left." I screenshotted it, timestamp visible, battery percentage visible, everything visible. Then my father texted, "Do not create a scene with the bank. They have procedures for a reason." I screenshotted that too. At 9:06, my brother Evan called. I put him on speaker and recorded audio on my old phone because a friend from school once told me that if a family member gets nervous enough to call instead of text, they usually bring something accidental with them. He said, "Rock, just let this cool off." I said, "Did you know they called my bank?" Long pause. I heard turn signal clicks. He was driving. He said, "Mom asked me for your old dog's name this week." I closed my eyes. Mabel. Yeah. I had used Mabel as the answer to a security question on the student account when I was 19. Not on my new one, but my parents did not know that. I asked, "Did she tell you why?" He said, "She said she was verifying something for your graduation dinner reservation." I said nothing. Then he said quieter, "Dad also asked if you still banked at the Hillsborough branch." I thought it was weird. That was my first outsider who was not really an outsider yet. My brother had known enough to feel wrong and stayed silent anyway. I did not yell at him. I said, "If they ask again, do not answer anything. And if they text you about me, save it." He said, "Okay." I hung up and started a folder in my Google Drive called May 17th, screenshots, receipt, notes, audio file, email from payroll. Every piece got its own name. I had been keeping that folder for 0 hours and already it felt like a life raft. Saturday morning, May 18th at 9:10, I went to the Cumberland Federal Branch on West End. The bank smelled like carpet glue and burnt coffee from the break room, the way small banks always do. A woman in a green blazer at the front podium asked how she could help me, and I said, "My accounts were frozen yesterday because someone made false fraud claims about me." She blinked once and said, "You need our fraud operations manager. Let me see if Mr. Baines is in." He was, Colin Baines. Mid-40s, pale blue shirt, wedding ring, careful voice. He brought me into a glass office and offered water. I put my folder on the desk, physical and digital, because I had printed what I had at FedEx on the way there. I said, "Before we start, I need the names of every person who touched my accounts yesterday." He said, "I cannot give you everything immediately, but I can tell you what I can verify." Then he looked at the notes on his screen, and I watched his expression shift from routine to interested. He said, "Yesterday at 3:47 p.m., someone called the fraud line claiming to be you. They attempted to report suspicious internal transfers and stated you were under duress. That call failed full authentication, but it triggered a watch note because they had partial identifying information." I asked, "What identifying information?" "Date of birth, last four of social, old address on Creekview Drive, my parents' house." He kept reading. "At 4:02 p.m., a second caller identified herself as your mother and said you had a history of erratic spending and were being manipulated by someone at school. She asked for emergency restriction due to mental health concerns. Our policy should have stopped there." Should have. I remember that phrase. He clicked again. At 4:19 p.m., a branch employee at our Hillsborough office entered a note that immediate family had presented in person with what was described as a previously signed emergency contact authorization from 2021. Based on combined flags, risk placed a temporary restriction pending customer contact. I said, "What was the document?" He turned the monitor slightly. Not enough for me to see details, but enough to confirm it existed. "A one-page form with your name, signature, and your parents listed as emergency contacts for account irregularities." I said, "I have never signed anything like that for this bank." He looked at me carefully. "This account was opened in February, correct?" "Yes." "Then that document should not have been used. There are moments when professionals stop speaking like institutions and start speaking like people who have just realized another professional under them did something stupid. This was one of those moments." I handed him my printed screenshots and said, "My mother texted me last night that the bank flagged behavior that looked unstable. My father texted me not to create a scene with the bank. They knew before I did, they announced it at my graduation dinner." He read the texts, he asked if I could forward them. I did. Then he asked, "Do you want me to pull the branch camera footage from Hillsborough and the incoming call logs from yesterday?" I said, "Yes." "Do you also want me to place a note that no third party has authorization to discuss your accounts under any circumstances?" "Yes." He typed that while I watched. Then he said, "Rachel, I'm going to be very plain with you. If your parents used false information and an old document to interfere with your access to funds, we can fix the account status. But reimbursement for downstream costs will depend on how this review comes out. Downstream costs, rent, late fees, start date, deposit, gas, food. I slid another paper across the desk. It was my lease agreement for the Donaldson apartment. First month's rent and deposit due by cashier's check on May 29th, $4,100. I had highlighted the due date in yellow. I said, I need access before then, and my payroll account needs to be active by Monday. He nodded. I understand. Give me until Tuesday afternoon to pull internal records. Today is about making sure nothing else happens. He had me sign new signature cards, change all security questions again, add a verbal passphrase, and remove every old profile note tied to my social. He printed me a temporary statement showing the funds were still there but restricted. Seeing the money on paper and still not being able to use it was worse than not seeing it at all. As I stood to leave, he said, "One more thing. Do not tell your parents what we are checking. People change stories when they know where the gaps are." I said, "They already tell stories for a living." He gave me the first small smile of that day. Outside, the Saturday traffic on West End sounded harsh and metallic. I sat in my car with the engine off and called my Aunt Linda. She answered on the first ring. I said, "They used some old paper with my signature on it." She was quiet for 2 seconds. Then she said, "Rachel, your mother had me witness something at her kitchen table 2 summers ago. She said it was a backup contact page for your student account because you were always working. I did not read it closely. I signed as witness." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my hand cramped. What date? August 12th, 2021, around 6 in the evening. I remember because your uncle had gone to get barbecue from Edley's. I closed my eyes again. She said, "I am sorry," I believed her. That was the problem. She had known something and not understood it, and then the moment to say it had stretched into almost 3 years. I said, "Do not apologize yet. Can you send me that in writing with the date and what you remember?" "Yes," she texted it 7 minutes later. Full name, date, time, what my mother said the document was, the fact that I was not present. I saved it in the folder. If you have ever realized that family paperwork has a half-life longer than your trust does, you know why I sat in that car for another 10 minutes doing nothing. Not the panic kind, the cataloging kind, the kind where your brain starts laying files in neat rows because neat rows are the only thing standing between you and chaos. Stay with me, because the next part was where they got greedy. At 1:34 that afternoon, my mother called from her cell. I let it ring out. She left a voicemail. "Rachel, this drama is unnecessary. The bank was concerned. Your father and I merely confirmed context. If you continue being adversarial, the review could take longer, and that would not be wise with your apartment situation." I played it twice, then once more into a recording app. Threats from careful people are always dressed like advice. By Sunday evening, I had 7 texts from relatives, all variations of "your parents are worried about you and do not let pride ruin this." Cheryl sent, "Your mother says you have been overwhelmed since finals." I did not respond to any of them. I made a list instead, names, times, exact phrasing. Monday, May 20th at 8:55 a.m., I walked into Riverstone Pediatric Dental in navy scrubs that still smelled faintly like the plastic they came in. The office had that clean mint scent mixed with rubber gloves and fluoride varnish. Children were laughing in the fish-themed waiting room because someone had put Finding Nemo on the wall TV. It should have felt like the first day of my adult life. Instead, I was carrying a manila folder thick enough to matter. Dr. Meredith Sloan called me into her office at 9:20, after I turned in my payroll packet with the direct deposit section blank except for temporary paper check requested. She closed the door and said, "Rachel, are you okay?" I said, "My parents made false fraud claims to my bank on Friday. My accounts are frozen. I'm fixing it." She was silent for a beat, then said the exact right thing. "Do you need flexibility this week? Or do you need privacy?" I almost cried at that. Not because it was dramatic, because it was competent. I said, "Both, if possible." She nodded. "Done," then she said. "Our office manager, Tasha, used to work at a regional bank. If you need someone to help you read a bank letter, ask her. This is what decent people do. They make practical room for you." At 12:11 p.m., on my lunch break in my car, I got a call from Cumberland Federal Risk Operations. A woman named Denise Holloway introduced herself as regional investigator. Her voice had that flat steadiness people get when they spend all day dealing with liars. She said, "Ms. Mercer, We are escalating your case. I need to confirm whether your parents visited the Hillsborough branch on Friday. I said yes. I believe so, she said. We have lobby footage showing two individuals matching the names Marcia Mercer and Daniel Mercer entering at 4:14 p.m. and leaving at 4:26 p.m. We also have the paper they presented. My whole body went still. I asked, "Is it fake?" She said, "It appears to be a repurposed contact form from an older account at another institution with handwritten alterations and a cut and pasted account number section. We are comparing signatures now. Not forged in the cinematic sense. Worse, domestic. Salvaged from old trust." I said, "Can I get my money back today?" She said, "Not today. I'm sorry, we need the branch manager and our compliance officer to sign off because an employee accepted the document." Then she added, "I also need to know whether anyone else in your family may have provided account security answers." I told her about Evan and the dog name. I told her the exact time he called. She asked me to send the audio if I had it. I said I did, by 3:40. Tasha from the dental office was sitting with me in the staff break room beside the humming mini fridge while I forwarded files to Denise. The break room smelled like coffee grounds and lemon disinfectant. Tasha watched my hands shake as I renamed attachments and said, "Breathe. Make every file name factual, date, time, source, never emotional." So I did. May 17th, 8:23 p.m. Mother text May 17th, 9:06 p.m. Brother call audio May 18th, aunt witness statement. May 20th, mother voicemail threat. At 4:52, Denise emailed me confirming receipt. She also wrote one line that changed the shape of the week. "We have identified two additional calls placed after the initial restriction, one on Saturday morning and one on Sunday evening, both asking whether account funds could be converted to cashier's checks if customer appeared confused." I read that line 3 times. They were not just trying to freeze me, they were testing how far they could move once I was stuck. That is the thing people misunderstand about this kind of betrayal. It is never only the first lie, it is the map of the next 5 moves. Now, let me take you back to Tuesday, May 21st, at 6:30 p.m. to my Aunt Linda's kitchen in Bellevue. The house smelled like onions and butter and the cedar blocks she keeps in the junk drawer for some reason. She had printed out her witness statement and signed it in blue ink in front of me, because Denise wanted a fresh version with today's date. My Uncle Rob was outside trimming the hedges. My cousin Micah sat on the counter swinging one leg and pretending not to listen. Aunt Linda put down her pen and said, "There's something else." I waited, she said. "In March, your mother asked me if the bank could put a hold on someone if their family thought they were making bad decisions. I told her I had no idea." She said, and I am quoting her, "Rachel thinks graduation makes her untouchable." I wrote that down. Then Linda said, quieter, "I should have told you then, I know that." I looked at her. She looked back without defending herself. Sometimes accountability is just a person staying seated under what they have done. I said, "Thank you for saying it now." At 7:12, while I was still there, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dinner Thursday, family only. We are going to clear this up before you damage your reputation further. No apology, not even the performance of one." My aunt looked at the screen and said, "Do not go alone." I had no intention of going alone, but I also knew I had not asked anyone from the bank for anything that dramatic. Not yet. Wednesday morning at 10:18, Denise called me from a direct line. I was sterilizing instruments at work and the autoclave hissed in the background like a warning. She said, "We completed signature comparison. The emergency contact authorization presented Friday contains a signature block lifted from an older form. It was not executed for your current accounts. There are also handwritten additions in black gel ink over a photocopied page. The branch employee should not have accepted it." I leaned against the counter. She continued, "We are lifting the restrictions by noon today. We are also crediting back $68 in pending insufficient funds and late charge reimbursements so far. If you send any additional fees caused by the hold, we will review those too." I said, "Thank you." Then she said, "There is more. The recorded calls include your father attempting to answer a security prompt and then asking, 'Would the dog count if she has not had it since college?'" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because humiliation arrived wearing his voice. Denise went on, "I need to ask you something outside the normal script. Are your parents likely to keep escalating if told they are no longer permitted to discuss your accounts?" Yes, I thought so. We are placing them on an internal caution list, and the Hillsborough employee who bypassed policy is being suspended pending review. I sat down on the break room chair so quickly it scraped the floor. The price was starting to form. Not enough. But something at 12:06. My app turned from red to normal. The balances were green again. I transferred $4,100 to get the cashier's check ready for the apartment and $239 to cover the scrubs, Loop's deposit, and the groceries I had been stretching since Friday. I stared at the screen until my shoulders dropped for the first time in 5 days. I did not celebrate. I organized, I made 3 folders, bank records, family messages, damages. Then I added a fourth, Thursday dinner. If you've ever had that brief window where the practical crisis ends and the emotional one finally gets room to speak, you know it can be worse. I had my money back. I still did not have a family I could safely stand near. And by Thursday night, I was going to have to sit across from them while they tried to turn this into concern. Before I tell you how that dinner went, take a second to like and subscribe if this story is hitting something real for you. A lot of women know what it feels like when we were just worried gets used as a weapon. And what happened next only worked because one professional refused to let my parents reframe it. Thursday, May 23rd at 7 p.m. My parents hosted what my mother called a quiet family dinner at their house in Brentwood. Quiet was one of her favorite lies. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and the lemon oil she uses on the table before company comes. There were 11 people there. My parents, me, Evan, Aunt Linda, Uncle Rob, my cousin Micah, Cheryl, my grandmother June, and 2 family friends from church, Neil and Patrice Coulter. I had not invited anyone from the bank. That was important. Denise had, at 3:40 that afternoon, she called and said, "Ms. Mercer, your mother left me a voicemail requesting a courtesy conversation with the family because she believes this is all a misunderstanding. I do not usually do this. But because your funds were wrongly restricted and because they continue contacting the bank, I am willing to stop by for 10 minutes and explain our findings if you want a witness." I asked, "You would actually come?" She said, "I dislike people who use our systems to bully relatives." So yes. She came. I got to the house at 6:54 and parked behind Cheryl's white Lexus. My mother opened the door before I knocked, which meant she had been watching the Ring camera. She wore a pale blue blouse and pearl earrings, and the face of a woman prepared to be admired for her restraint. "Rachel," she said, "thank you for coming in a calmer frame of mind." I walked past her and said, "I'm only here to listen." She smiled tightly. "Good." My father was at the head of the table pouring iced tea like a man in a commercial. He looked up and said, "Let us have an adult conversation tonight." I sat down. I put my phone face down beside my plate, recording audio in airplane mode on the old phone in my purse. I had learned enough by then not to enter a room empty-handed. Dinner started with my mother saying grace. Halfway through the meal, after the chicken and asparagus had been passed, and my grandmother had asked me twice whether my apartment had stairs, my father set down his fork and said, "We are here because Rachel has made some alarming allegations over a routine financial safeguard." There it was, the rewrite. My mother folded her napkin and said, "The bank was concerned by transfer activity and by Rachel's recent state. We confirmed that she has been under strain. That is all." Aunt Linda looked at her plate. Cheryl nodded like a metronome. "I said nothing," my father continued. "Young people do not always understand how serious fraud protocols are. If a parent raises concern, institutions will naturally take that seriously." I still said nothing. Then my mother turned to the room and gave the line she had been saving. "Rachel has always interpreted structure as control." That sentence had probably lived in her head for years. At 7:19, the doorbell rang. My mother looked annoyed in a very controlled way. "Who on earth?" Evan stood. "I will get it." I heard the front door open, murmured voices, then measured footsteps on hardwood. Denise Holloway walked into my parents' dining room, carrying a black portfolio and wearing a charcoal blazer. Mid-40s, copper-colored bob, no expression at all. Behind her was a younger man with a visitor badge from Cumberland Federal named Isaac Porter, branch security. He looked like he wished he were anywhere else. The room went silent. Denise said, "Good evening. I am Denise Holloway with Cumberland Federal Bank. Mrs. Mercer, you left me a voicemail asking for clarification in front of family." I have 10 minutes. My mother's face did not change much. That was one of her talents. But she did place her water glass down very carefully before speaking. That will not be necessary, Denise said. I am already here. My father stood halfway and then sat back down. This is an invasion. Denise opened the portfolio. No, sir. Your visits to our Hillsborough branch on May 17th and your follow-up calls on May 18th and 19th are in our records. Since you have characterized this as concern, I am here to state the bank's findings accurately. The room did that chair stillness again. 11 people, forks down, my grandmother June whispering, "What is this?" to nobody. Denise looked at one paper and began. On Friday, May 17th at 3:47 p.m., our fraud line received a call from a person claiming to be Rachel Mercer. That caller failed full authentication. She turned one page at 4:02 p.m. We received a second call from Marcia Mercer alleging that Rachel Mercer was mentally unstable, under outside influence and needed emergency restriction on her funds. My mother opened her mouth. Denise kept going. At 4:14 p.m., Marcia Mercer and Daniel Mercer entered our Hillsborough branch and presented a document described as an emergency contact authorization. It was later determined to be an altered copy of an older form not valid for Rachel Mercer's current accounts. My Aunt Linda closed her eyes. Denise continued in the same tone. At 10:22 a.m. on May 18th and 6:11 p.m. on May 19th, additional calls from Daniel Mercer and Marcia Mercer asked whether restricted funds could be converted to cashier's checks if the customer appeared confused. No one moved. Then Denise said the sentence that split the room cleanly in half. To be clear, the restriction on Rachel Mercer's accounts was caused by false statements from her parents and an invalid document presented in person. Silence, not the awkward kind, the structural kind. My mother said that is a very harsh interpretation. Denise reached into the portfolio, took out a transcript page, and said, "Would you like me to read the recorded line where Mr. Mercer asks if the dog would count for a security question?" My father looked at the table and said, "No, just that one word, flat." That was his reaction. Not tears, not outrage. A single syllable from a man who had spent my whole life assuming tone could outrank evidence. Cheryl's mouth parted. Neil Coulter stared at my father as if a church mural had started talking back. My grandmother June put her hand over her chest and whispered, "Daniel, then Denise did something I will be grateful for as long as I live. She made the price specific," she said. "Rachel's funds have been restored in full. The bank reimbursed all confirmed fees linked to the restriction. Your names have been placed on our internal do not disclose list, and you are not permitted to discuss or act on Rachel Mercer's accounts in any branch, by phone, or through any employee. We are also filing an internal incident report regarding misuse of customer security processes. If further contact occurs, it will be documented as attempted account interference. Attempted account interference, not family conflict, not misunderstanding, not concern. Paper language can save you when people language has been weaponized." My mother said very softly, "Marcia would never have used the phrase mentally unstable." Denise looked at her notes and answered, "That phrase appears in the branch note and is consistent with your call summary." She did not sound angry. She sounded bored, which was somehow worse. Then Isaac, the security man who had not spoken yet, held out an envelope to me. "Ms. Mercer, this contains the reimbursement confirmation, the restriction release letter, and the point of contact if any collector or landlord needs verification." I took it. My hands were steady. Aunt Linda began to cry silently. Just tears. No sound. Cheryl looked at my mother, then at me, and then at her plate like she had made several bad choices in a row and was only now seeing the pattern. My father finally said, "We were trying to slow her down." Denise snapped the portfolio shut. "Sir," she said, "that is not a service banks provide to parents of competent adults." Then she nodded once at me and left. Isaac followed her. The front door closed. The silence after they left lasted maybe 6 seconds. I counted because I wanted to remember the exact amount of oxygen my mother had to sit inside. Then my grandmother said, "You froze her money?" My mother turned toward her. "Mother, please do not reduce this," June said, sharper than I had heard in years. "You froze her money." My father stood up too fast and his chair legs scraped the hardwood. "This conversation is over." I looked at the envelope in my hand, then at my plate, then at my parents. I said, "No, It is just documented now, and I stood up. I did not shout. I did not list my sacrifices and wounds like invoice items. Instead, I took the envelope, my purse, and the lemon bar I had not eaten wrapped in a napkin because I had not had dinner so much as endured proximity. Then I walked to the door. Behind me, my mother said, "Rachel, do not be theatrical." I turned around once. Theatrical was the microphone at Carrabba's. Then I left. The concrete price did not arrive all at once. That is another thing people get wrong. Sometimes justice comes in office language and meeting invitations. On Friday morning, May 24th at 9:31, Denise emailed me a formal reimbursement list. $79.41 for returned payment fees and late charges. $32 for overnight replacement of my debit card. $21.14 in overdraft reversal adjustments. She also added that the bank would reimburse my June 1st prorated rent penalty if the property manager confirmed it was caused by the hold. I got that confirmation 2 days later. Another $150 back. By Tuesday, May 28th, the Hillsborough branch employee who accepted the altered form had been suspended. 2 weeks later, Denise called to tell me he was no longer employed by Cumberland Federal. She did not give details. She did not need to. Somebody else paid too. My parents did not speak to me for 9 days after the dinner. Then my father sent a single text. "This has gone far enough." I took a screenshot and did not answer. On Monday, June 3rd, while I was unpacking kitchen boxes in my new apartment on Emery Drive in Donaldson, Cheryl called. I almost ignored it. Then I answered because gossiping women often become useful by accident. She said, "I think you should know your parents told people the bank lady was your friend pretending to be an investigator." I said she gave everyone her card. Cheryl exhaled. "Yes." Neil's wife called the number. I sat down on the floor between the dish towels and the toaster. "What happened?" She confirmed everything. "Rachel, your mother was asked to step down from handling finance counts for the church missions committee." There it was. Not social shame, a named loss. My mother had managed church money for 6 years. Spreadsheets, benevolence, disbursements, donation tallies after special offerings. She loved being trusted with locked drawers and keys. Now she wasn't. That same week, my father learned the local credit union, where he sat on a volunteer business advisory panel, had received a quiet heads up from Neil Coulter, who happened to know someone on the board. He was not charged with anything, he was not arrested, but he was removed from the panel before their July breakfast and did not get the small business mentorship role he had been angling for. The reason given was concerns regarding judgment around financial boundaries. I saw the email because Evan forwarded it to me from my father's laptop screenshot after Dad left it open at the house. A son can stay silent once. Sometimes he does not do it twice. Evan came to my apartment on Saturday, June 8th, with Thai takeout and an apology that sounded like it cost him something real. He stood in my kitchen while the air conditioner clicked on and off and said, "I knew enough to know it was wrong. I did not want them angry at me." I set out plates. I let him say it clean. He went on. "When Mom asked about Mabel, I knew. I just told myself maybe it was not what it looked like. I handed him a fork and said, 'That is how people help bad things happen.'" He nodded. "I know." Then he gave me something useful. He had found in the family office drawer a stack of photocopies my mother kept in a manila folder labeled Rachel School, old signature pages, financial aid forms, account forms from the student bank. He had taken photos before she moved them. He emailed them to me from his car. I did not need them anymore for the bank, but I wanted them anyway, because once someone has shown you they keep a kit for impersonating your consent, you stop calling it overreacting. The photos showed my signature from 3 different years on unrelated pages. One page had my 21-year-old looping R cut neatly at the bottom edge, matching what Denise had described. It was all there, domestic forgery assembled with craft project confidence. I put the images in the folder. That folder had become the only inheritance I trusted. If you have ever had to accept an apology from someone who did not protect you the first time, you know there is no music under that moment. No softening, just truth, and whether it arrived in time to matter. I let Evan keep a relationship with me in a smaller room than before. My parents did not get one. By July, my life had begun again in practical ways. I was working 4 days a week at Riverstone. I could make the ultrasonic scaler sing cleanly enough that Dr. Sloan stopped hovering after the third week. My first full paycheck hit on July 5th at 6:43 a.m., and I stared at the deposit notification longer than any adult should. There is relief, and then there is proof. The family fallout kept moving in little ugly circles. My grandmother stopped letting my mother help with her pension paperwork. Aunt Linda no longer signed anything at my mother's kitchen table without reading every line twice. Cheryl, to her credit, started correcting people when they repeated the line about me being unstable. She did not become noble. She became accurate. I accepted that. In August, my mother mailed me a 5-page letter printed on thick cream paper. No handwriting. No, I'm sorry, she called it a chronology. She said the bank had misread parental concern through a compliance lens and that I had allowed outsiders to criminalize family care. She said my public posture at dinner had been cold and punitive. I read it once over coffee that smelled too dark and burnt because I had forgotten the pot. Then I put it in the folder and wrote the date on the back. I did not respond. My father never apologized at all. He called me on Labor Day and left a voicemail saying, "Your mother is taking this harder than she should have to." As if even now the injury could be reassigned to the person who caused it. I kept that one too. By October, I learned one more thing through Denise. She should not have told me, maybe, but by then she understood the ecosystem. The bank had submitted their internal incident file to the Tennessee Bankers Association Fraud Exchange, which meant if my parents ever tried the same emergency access story at another member institution, the pattern would be visible. Not a criminal case. Not TV. Better in some ways. A quiet closed door that follows you. My mother lost her committee role at church. My father lost his advisory seat. Both of them were blocked from my bank. Their names were attached to a documented account interference incident across multiple branches. They paid in the exact currency they valued most, credibility with institutions and me. I got my money back. All of it, every dollar. I moved into my apartment on time. I kept my job. I built the adult life they had tried to pause with one altered page and a few practiced phone calls. People like to end stories here with healing that sounds prettier than truth. So here is the truth. I still check my banking app more than I should, sometimes twice before bed, sometimes in the grocery store parking lot for no reason at all. If an unknown number calls me at work, I feel the back of my neck go hot before I answer. I do not think that disappears just because Denise Holloway walked into a dining room and read my parents their own actions in a flat professional voice. Winning quietly is still winning, but it does not make the body forget. My mother sends a birthday text every year now. Always at 8 a.m., always thinking of you today. My father sent me a Home Depot gift card at Christmas with no note, which felt so specifically him that I laughed in my kitchen and then threw the envelope away. I see them at funerals and once at my cousin's baby shower. We speak the way strangers speak in elevators when they know not to get personal. There is no reconciliation montage coming. There is no final scene where they admit I was right in a voice big enough to heal anything. What there is a file folder in a locked drawer in my apartment. Inside it are screenshots, voicemails, branch letters, reimbursement notices, a release confirmation, and one transcript page where my father asked whether the dog would count. Some damage does not become wisdom, it just becomes policy. And mine now is simple. No shared accounts, no unsigned paper left on tables, no family access dressed up as concern. No second chance with my finances, not ever. I was 24 when my parents had my bank accounts frozen and announced it over tiramisu like a joke. I'm 27 now. I clean my own kitchen. I pay my own rent. My paycheck lands every other Friday at 6:43 in the morning, and every single time it lands in an account they cannot